Officer James Chen drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his patrol car, his eyes scanning the quiet streets of Sacramento as the evening rain created a gentle rhythm on the roof. It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday night shift, the kind where most officers caught up on paperwork or responded to minor disturbances. The digital clock on his dashboard read 8:45 p.m. when the first call came through. Dispatch to Unit 247, we have multiple reports of a vehicle weaving erratically on Highway 50 eastbound. Silver Toyota Camry, license plate starting with XRK. Civilians report near-miss incidents. Chen immediately straightened in his seat, his years of training kicking in. Unit 247 responding. I'm 3 minutes from that location. He flicked on his sirens and pulled onto the highway, his mind already running through standard procedures for potential DUI cases. The rain had picked up, creating a misty veil that made visibility challenging. Other vehicles respectfully moved aside as Chen's patrol car cut through the weather. In his rearview mirror, he could see his partner, Officer Sarah Martinez, checking their onboard computer for additional details. James, dispatch just updated. We got 5 separate calls about this vehicle in the last 10 minutes. Latest report says they almost sideswiped a minivan with kids in it. Martinez reported, her voice carrying the controlled tension that came with potentially dangerous situations. Chen nodded, his eyes searching through the rain-streaked windshield. After 7 years on the force, he had handled countless traffic stops, but something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the weather, or perhaps it was the unusually high number of concerned citizen reports. Through the rainfall, they finally spotted the silver Camry. The vehicle was indeed moving erratically, drifting between lanes without signaling and occasionally braking for no apparent reason. Chen activated his light bar, signaling for the driver to pull over. The Camry continued for another quarter mile before finally responding to the sirens, pulling over in a jerky motion that sent water spraying from its tires. Chen positioned his patrol car carefully, following protocol to ensure their safety during the stop. I'll take point on this one, Chen told Martinez, unbuckling his seatbelt. Keep an eye on the situation and be ready if we need backup. His partner nodded, already reaching for the radio to update dispatch on their status. As Chen stepped out into the rain, his boots splashing in the growing puddles, he followed his usual routine. Hand resting near his holster, not on it, but close enough for quick access if needed. He approached the vehicle from slightly behind the driver's side, using his flashlight to illuminate the interior. The rain ran down his face as he observed the driver through the window. Something about the silhouette seemed strangely familiar, but Chen couldn't quite place it. The figure appeared to be an older man, sitting unusually still in the driver's seat. Sacramento Police Department, Chen announced clearly, his voice carrying over the sound of passing traffic and rainfall. Please keep your hands where I can see them and slowly roll down your window. The window descended with an electric whir, and Chen leaned slightly forward, shining his flashlight to get a better look at the driver. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The beam of light revealed a face he knew as well as his own father's, the lined, distinguished features of retired Captain Michael Foster. Chen's breath caught in his throat. This was the man who had guided him through the police academy, who had taken him under his wing when he was a rookie struggling to find his footing. Foster had been more than a mentor. He had been a second father, sharing wisdom over countless cups of coffee and late-night patrol rides. But something was wrong. Foster's usually sharp, alert eyes were unfocused and glassy. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his shirt partially untucked, and his silver hair uncombed. When he turned to face Chen, there was no immediate recognition in his expression. License and registration, sir, Chen managed to say, his training taking over even as his mind raced with questions and concern. His voice remained steady, professional, though his heart was pounding in his chest. Behind him, he could hear Martinez's footsteps approaching, responding to something in his body language that suggested this wasn't a routine stop anymore. The rain continued to fall, creating a curtain of water that seemed to isolate this moment from the rest of the world. As Chen stood face to face with the man who had shaped his entire career, now sitting behind the wheel of a car that had nearly caused multiple accidents, the night had just become anything but routine. Time seemed to freeze as Officer Chen stood in the pouring rain, his flashlight beam illuminating the face of his former mentor. Captain Michael Foster blinked slowly, squinting against the light, his usual sharp demeanor replaced by something Chen had never seen before: confusion and disorientation. "Evening, officer," Foster mumbled, his words slightly slurred. He fumbled with his wallet, dropping it onto the floor of the car. When he bent to retrieve it, his movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. Chen's mind raced back to their last meeting, just 3 months ago at the department's annual barbecue. Foster had been his usual self then, commanding, alert, and full of stories about his retirement. The man sitting before him now seemed like a completely different person. "Sir, are you aware of why I pulled you over tonight?" Chen asked, maintaining his professional tone despite the turmoil in his gut. He could hear Officer Martinez positioning herself on the passenger side of the vehicle, following standard procedure. Foster looked up, his eyes struggling to focus. I was just heading home. Everything's fine, son. Just a little tired, that's all." He squinted again, and for a moment, a flash of recognition crossed his face. "James, is that you?" Chen's throat tightened. "Yes, sir, it's Officer Chen. We've received multiple calls about erratic driving. Several witnesses reported near collisions." He paused, then added softly, "Captain Foster, have you been drinking tonight?" Martinez's flashlight beam joined Chen's, revealing the car's interior. Everything seemed in order, but there was an open prescription bottle in the cup holder. Foster followed Chen's gaze and quickly tried to cover it with his hand. "It's nothing," Foster said, his voice carrying an edge of panic that Chen had never heard before. "Just some new medication. The doctor said it was fine to drive." "I'm fine, James. You can let me go home." The use of his first name struck Chen hard. In all their years working together, Foster had been a stickler for professional boundaries while on duty. He had drilled into Chen the importance of maintaining those boundaries, even with fellow officers. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Chen said, his voice gentle but firm. The rain had soaked through his uniform, but he barely noticed. "We need to make sure you're safe to drive." Foster's hand gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You don't understand. I can't have this happening. Not like this." His voice cracked, and for a moment, Chen saw fear in his mentor's eyes. "Captain," Chen said, opening the car door slowly, "please step out of the vehicle. Let me help you." As Foster struggled with his seatbelt, Chen recalled all the times this man had helped him through difficult situations. The night Chen had lost his first victim at a traffic accident, Foster had sat with him for hours, helping him process the trauma. When Chen's father had passed away, Foster had been there, supporting him through the funeral and making sure he took enough time to grieve. Finally, Foster managed to exit the vehicle, swaying slightly as he stood. The rain plastered his silver hair to his forehead, making him look older and more vulnerable than Chen had ever seen him. "I'll need you to perform a few simple tests," Chen said, his heart heavy. "Standard procedure, as you know." Foster nodded, a ghost of his old self showing through as he attempted to stand straighter. "You're doing your job," he said quietly, "just like I taught you." Officer Martinez approached with an umbrella, holding it over Foster. "Sir, are you currently taking any medications?" she asked, having noticed the prescription bottle. Foster's shoulders slumped. "Started new meds last week. Doctor said there might be some side effects, but I didn't think." He trailed off, looking lost and confused again. Chen exchanged a concerned look with his partner. Whatever was happening with his mentor went beyond a simple traffic stop. Something was seriously wrong, and Chen realized that his next actions could have far-reaching consequences for both of them. The rain continued to fall around them as Chen prepared to administer the field sobriety test to the very man who had once taught him how to perform it. Passing cars slowed to look at the scene, their headlights creating halos in the rain-filled air, as one of Sacramento PD's most respected retired officers stood swaying slightly in the glare of patrol car lights. Officer Chen stood in the rain, watching as Captain Foster attempted to walk in a straight line. The older man's feet stumbled, his arms wavering as he tried to maintain balance. Each misstep felt like a knife in Chen's heart, but he forced himself to document everything in his notepad, just as Foster had taught him years ago. Left foot crossed over right, subject unable to maintain straight line. Chen muttered into his body camera, keeping his voice professional despite the chaos in his mind. Behind him, Officer Martinez was quietly running Foster's plates and checking his record. a routine they performed countless times before, but never with someone they knew so well. Memories flooded Chen's thoughts as he watched his mentor struggle. He remembered Foster's voice during the academy training. "Your integrity is everything in this job. The moment you compromise it, you compromise everything we stand for." Those words had shaped Chen's entire career, becoming the foundation of every decision he made on duty. "James," Foster called out, his voice shaking as he reached the end of the line. "This isn't necessary. You know me, 28 years on the force, never had a single complaint." His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, now held a desperate plea that Chen had never seen before. Martinez approached Chen, speaking low enough that only he could hear. "His record's clean, but I ran those plates through dispatch. There are 2 other reports from last week, similar behavior, but he was gone before units arrived." The information hit Chen like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident. Whatever was happening with Foster had been building up, and now Chen was faced with a decision that could change both their lives forever. Rain dripped from Chen's badge as he considered his options. He could let Foster go with a warning, call him a cab, and handle this unofficially. Many officers would do exactly that for a respected retired captain. Foster had written countless recommendations, had testified in court to save officers' careers, had been there for so many of them in their darkest moments. But then Chen remembered another lesson Foster had taught him. The badge isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that hurt people we care about. A car passed by slowly, its headlights illuminating Foster's face. The proud man Chen had known was now swaying slightly, his clothes soaked through, looking lost and vulnerable. The prescription bottle in his car suggested there was more to this story, but Chen couldn't ignore the fact that Foster had put lives at risk tonight. "Sir," Chen said, his voice steady despite the storm both around and within him, "I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Foster's face crumpled. "You can't do this, son. Please, this will destroy everything I built." Chen felt physically ill as he reached for his handcuffs. "Captain Foster, you're being detained on suspicion of driving under the influence. You have the right to remain silent." The words felt like ash in his mouth as he recited the Miranda rights that Foster himself had once helped him memorize. Martinez moved forward to assist, her own face reflecting the difficulty of the moment. As they secured the handcuffs, Foster's shoulders began to shake, and Chen realized his mentor was crying silently. "I'm sorry," Foster whispered, "all pretense of authority gone. I don't know what's happening to me anymore." Chen guided Foster toward the patrol car, supporting him carefully. Each step felt like a betrayal, yet he knew in his heart that he was doing exactly what Foster had trained him to do, protecting the public, even when it hurt. As Chen helped Foster into the back seat, he caught his reflection in the window. The rain had washed away any pretense, leaving only the raw truth of the moment. Sometimes doing the right thing meant being willing to break your own heart. "Unit 247 to dispatch," Chen said into his radio, his voice remarkably steady. "We're going to need medical evaluation at the station. Subject is secure, possibly medical factors involved." He closed the car door gently, watching as his mentor, the man who had shaped his entire career, sat in the back of his patrol car, head bowed in defeat. The night wasn't over, but Chen knew that nothing would ever be the same after this. The weight of the badge had never felt heavier. The fluorescent lights of the police station's processing room cast harsh shadows across Captain Foster's face as Officer Chen began the booking procedure. The rain had stopped, but both men's clothes remained damp, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere in the already tense room. "Blood pressure's a bit high," the medical technician noted, removing the cuff from Foster's arm. "And his pupils are showing unusual response patterns." She jotted notes on her clipboard while glancing at the prescription bottle that had been found in Foster's car. Chen stood nearby, his notebook open but untouched. The formal questioning was about to begin, and for the first time in his career, he dreaded following protocol. Officer Martinez had positioned herself by the door, her presence offering silent support. "Captain Foster," Chen began, forcing himself to maintain eye contact, "I need to ask you about the medication found in your vehicle. The label shows it was filled last week. Can you tell me what it's for?" Foster's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the table. The proud posture he'd maintained throughout his career had crumbled, replaced by a subtle slump that made him appear years older than his actual age. "I didn't want anyone to know," Foster said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially not like this." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "The headache started 2 months ago. Then I began forgetting things, small things at first. Keys, appointments, names." Chen felt his throat tighten as Foster continued. "The doctor ran tests, said they needed to try different medications to find the right combination. This new one," he gestured toward the prescription bottle. "They said it might cause some side effects, but I didn't think." "Why were you driving tonight?" Chen asked, keeping his voice gentle but professional. "According to the warning label, operating vehicles is strictly prohibited while taking this medication." Foster's face flushed with shame. "I thought I could handle it. I've been driving these streets for 30 years, James. 30 years, his voice cracked. "I didn't read the warning label. I didn't want to admit I needed help." The medical technician cleared her throat softly. "Officer Chen, based on these readings and the medication interactions I'm seeing, we should probably get him to the hospital for a full evaluation." Chen nodded, making notes in his report. The situation was shifting from a potential DUI to a medical emergency, but the gravity of Foster's actions remained. "Captain, you almost hit several vehicles tonight, including a minivan with children inside." The words hung heavy in the air. Foster's hands began to shake more visibly. "I taught you everything about road safety," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Spent years drilling it into young officers' heads. And now look at me, becoming exactly what we fought to get off the streets." Martinez stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Foster's shoulder. "Sir, we're going to have the hospital run some tests. The medication interaction could be causing these issues." Foster looked up at Chen, his eyes clearing for a moment. "You did the right thing tonight, son. Exactly what I taught you to do." He attempted a weak smile. "I just never thought I'd be on this side of it." Chen felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "We'll need to file an official report, but right now, let's focus on getting you medical attention. Your health comes first." As the medical technician prepared to transport Foster to the hospital, he reached out and grabbed Chen's wrist. "James," he said, his grip surprisingly strong, "promise me something. Don't let this change how you do your job. The integrity you showed tonight, that's what makes you a good officer." Chen carefully removed Foster's hand, squeezing it reassuringly before letting go. "I learned from the best, sir. Now let's get you the help you need." As paramedics arrived to transport Foster, Chen watched his mentor being wheeled away. The night had transformed from a routine traffic stop into something that would change both their lives forever. But beneath the pain and confusion, there was a thread of hope. Hope that this confrontation, as difficult as it was, might be the first step toward getting Foster the help he truly needed. Martinez appeared at Chen's side. "You okay, partner?" Chen closed his notebook, his expression resolute. "No," he answered honestly. "But I will be. And so will he." The emergency room buzzed with activity as Officer Chen sat in the waiting area, his uniform still slightly damp from the rain. The events of the night played on repeat in his mind while he waited for news about Captain Foster's condition. Officer Martinez had returned to patrol, but not before making Chen promise to call her with any updates. Through the sliding glass doors of the ER, Chen watched as more police officers began arriving. Word had spread quickly through the department about Foster's detention. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran officer who had worked with Foster for 15 years, was the first to approach Chen. "How bad is it?" Rodriguez asked, taking a seat beside him. His face showed the same concern that Chen had seen reflected in every arriving officer's expression. "The doctors are running tests," Chen replied, rubbing his tired eyes. The medication interaction was worse than they initially thought. Plus, there's something else going on that they're trying to figure out. More officers filtered in, forming small groups in the waiting area. Some wore uniforms from their shifts, others had clearly rushed in from home in civilian clothes. The sight would have been heartwarming if the circumstances weren't so grave. Chen's phone buzzed continuously with messages from other officers and department staff. Some expressed support for his actions, others questioned whether detaining Foster had been necessary. The department's Internal Affairs Division had already contacted him, requesting a detailed report of the incident. Captain Sarah Wallace, the current head of their precinct, arrived around midnight. She made her way directly to Chen, her face serious but compassionate. "Walk with me," she said quietly, gesturing toward the hospital's small courtyard. Outside, the night air had turned cool after the rain. Wallace turned to face Chen, her expression thoughtful. "You're in a difficult position, Chen. Foster was your mentor, and he's beloved in the department. But I need to know exactly what happened out there." Chen took a deep breath and recounted everything: the erratic driving, the failed sobriety test, the prescription medication, and Foster's confused state. Wallace listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. "The dash cam footage has already been reviewed," she said when he finished. "You followed every procedure perfectly. That's not going to make this any easier, but it's important you know that." "Some of the officers think I should have handled it unofficially," Chen admitted, voicing the concern that had been nagging at him. Wallace's expression hardened slightly. "And if he had crashed into that minivan, could you have lived with that decision?" She shook her head. "You made the right call, Chen. The hard call, but the right one." A young doctor appeared in the courtyard doorway, calling Chen's name. Both officers hurried back inside, where the crowd of police had grown even larger. "Captain Foster is stable," the doctor announced to the gathered group. "The medication interaction caused severe disorientation, but there's something else we discovered during our tests. We'll need to run more extensive evaluations, but the initial results suggest—" The doctor's voice faded into background noise as Chen processed what was happening. His decision to detain Foster hadn't just been about road safety, it had potentially saved his mentor's life by bringing underlying health issues to light. Later that night, as most of the officers began dispersing, Chen sat completing his official report. Every detail had to be perfect, not just for the department's records, but for Foster's sake as well. The medical situation might affect how the incident was handled legally, but the facts needed to be clear and accurate. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Foster's daughter. "Thank you for looking out for Dad when he couldn't look out for himself. We've been worried about him, but didn't know how to help." Chen stared at the message for a long moment, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. The decision to detain his mentor had been one of the hardest choices of his career, but as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that it had been the right one. As he finished his report, Chen remembered one of Foster's favorite sayings: "Sometimes the measure of an officer isn't in the easy decisions, but in the ones that keep you awake at night." Tonight had certainly proved that point, but Chen knew he'd sleep eventually, secure in the knowledge that he'd done his duty, both to the public and to his mentor. The hospital conference room felt too small for the group assembled inside. Officer Chen sat beside Captain Foster's family, his daughter Emily and son Michael Jr., while Dr. Harrison, a neurologist, prepared to share the test results. The morning sun streamed through the windows, a stark contrast to the stormy night that had brought them all here. "The tests have revealed what we suspected," Dr. Harrison began, placing several brain scans on the light board. "Captain Foster is showing early signs of frontotemporal dementia. It's a condition that affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, which control personality, behavior, and memory." Emily gripped her brother's hand as the doctor continued. "The confusion and erratic behavior last night was caused by an interaction between his new medication and this underlying condition. Unfortunately, the previous doctor wasn't aware of the dementia when prescribing the medication." Chen leaned forward, his police notebook untouched in his lap. "Is this why he's been having memory issues?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, the symptoms probably started months ago, but they can be subtle at first. Changes in personality, difficulty with decision-making, memory lapses, these are all early indicators that might have been dismissed as normal aging." Michael Jr. cleared his throat. "Dad's been different lately. More forgetful, sometimes angry for no reason. We thought it was just retirement getting to him." "That's very common," Dr. Harrison explained. "People with frontotemporal dementia often show changes in judgment and behavior before memory problems become obvious. The medication he was prescribed for headaches unfortunately accelerated these symptoms." Chen thought back to the traffic stop, remembering Foster's confusion and uncharacteristic behavior. All the pieces were starting to fit together: the recent reports of erratic driving, the personality changes others had mentioned, the prescription bottle. What happens now? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. We'll start him on appropriate medication right away, Dr. Harrison replied. With proper treatment and support, many patients maintain their independence for quite some time. However, he added, looking directly at Foster's children, you shouldn't be driving anymore. Chen felt a wave of relief wash over him. His decision to detain Foster, though painful, had likely prevented a tragedy and led to this crucial diagnosis. A knock on the door interrupted them. Captain Foster himself entered, accompanied by a nurse. He looked more like himself after a night of proper medical care, though exhaustion lined his face. His eyes met Chen's, and this time there was clear recognition in them. James, Foster said, his voice stronger than it had been the night before. They tell me you might have saved my life last night. Chen stood, emotional but maintaining his professional composure. Just doing what you taught me, sir. Foster smiled sadly. You did better than that. You did what was right when it would have been easier to look the other way. He turned to his children. So, I guess you've heard the news? Emily stood and hugged her father. Dad, why didn't you tell us you were having problems? I didn't want to worry you, Foster replied, his voice cracking slightly. I thought I could handle it myself. Guess that didn't work out so well. Dr. Harrison stepped forward. Captain Foster, with your permission, I'd like to discuss the treatment plan with your family. As the doctor began explaining the next steps, Chen quietly gathered his things to leave. Foster caught his arm as he passed. Thank you, Foster said quietly. Not just for last night, but for being the kind of officer I'd always hoped you'd become. Chen nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As he left the conference room, he heard Foster beginning to talk with his family about the changes ahead. The revelation of his condition had brought clarity to the confusion of the previous night, but it had also opened the door to a new chapter in all their lives. Outside the hospital, Chen took a moment to collect himself before heading to his patrol car. The morning sun felt warm on his face, and for the first time since the traffic stop, he felt completely certain about his actions. Sometimes, he realized, doing the right thing led to exactly the help someone needed, even if they didn't know they needed it. A week after the incident, Officer Chen sat in the precinct's main conference room, surrounded by his fellow officers. Chief Williams stood at the front, addressing the assembled group about the events involving Captain Foster. The morning briefing had turned into an impromptu department-wide discussion. By now, you've all heard about what happened last week, Chief Williams began, his voice carrying across the quiet room. What you might not know is that Officer Chen's actions that night may have saved not only Captain Foster's life, but potentially others as well. Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair as dozens of eyes turned toward him. Officer Martinez, sitting beside him, gave his arm a supportive squeeze. The medical evaluation revealed a serious condition that had gone undiagnosed, the chief continued. Had Officer Chen chosen to look the other way, as some might have done out of respect for Foster's position, we could have been dealing with a tragedy instead. Sergeant Rodriguez raised his hand. How's the captain doing now? He started treatment. Chen spoke up, his voice steady. His family's with him, and the doctors are optimistic about managing his condition. The chief nodded, then turned to address the room again. This brings us to an important point. We're implementing new training protocols based on this incident. Officer Chen's handling of the situation will be used as a case study at the academy. Murmurs rippled through the room. Chen noticed several veteran officers nodding in approval, while some of the younger ones were taking notes. But sir, a rookie officer spoke up from the back. How do we handle situations where we have to enforce the law against someone we respect, someone who's trained us? The chief gestured to Chen. Officer Chen, would you like to address that? Chen stood slowly, facing his colleagues. The night I stopped Captain Foster, every instinct told me to let him go. He was my mentor, someone I looked up to. But he taught me something crucial years ago. Our badge isn't about showing favoritism or looking the other way. It's about protecting everyone, even from themselves sometimes. The room fell silent as Chen continued. If I had let him go that night, and something had happened to him or someone else, I wouldn't have been honoring what he taught me. Sometimes respect means making the hard choice, even when it hurts. Detective Lopez, a 20-year veteran, stood up. I worked with Foster for 15 years. The man I knew would be proud of what you did, Chen. In fact, he'd probably be the first to use this as a teaching moment. The chief stepped forward again. That's exactly why we're implementing these changes. Internal Affairs has reviewed the entire incident, the dash cam footage, body cam recordings, witness statements. Officer Chen followed every procedure perfectly while showing compassion and professionalism in an incredibly difficult situation. He turned to the whiteboard and began writing. Moving forward, we're adding new training modules on handling sensitive situations involving department personnel. We're also implementing better health monitoring protocols for retired officers. As the meeting continued, Chen's phone buzzed quietly. It was a message from Foster's daughter. "Dad's asking about you. Says he wants to talk to your academy class about what happened. Even now, he's still trying to teach." Chen smiled slightly, remembering all the times Foster had turned difficult situations into learning opportunities. Some things never changed. After the meeting, officers stopped by Chen's desk throughout the day, sharing their own stories about Foster and expressing support for how he handled the situation. Even those who had initially questioned his decision had come around after learning the full story. Later that afternoon, Chief Williams called Chen into his office. "The academy instructor wants you to help develop the new training module," he said. "Your experience that night, balancing duty with personal loyalty, that's something every officer needs to understand." Chen nodded, thinking about how this incident would shape future officers. "Captain Foster always said our toughest moments become our best teaching tools." "He was right," the chief replied. "And thanks to your actions, you'll be around to keep teaching those lessons himself." As Chen left the office, he passed the wall of honor where Foster's picture hung among other retired officers. The man in the photograph smiled confidently, badge gleaming. Chen had always tried to live up to that image, and now he realized that sometimes living up to someone's legacy meant making choices they themselves would have made, even when those choices were the hardest ones of all. 3 months after the night of the traffic stop, Officer Chen stood in the precinct parking lot, watching as a familiar figure approached. Captain Foster walked slowly but steadily, accompanied by his daughter Emily. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, and though he moved more carefully than before, his eyes were clear and alert. "James," Foster called out, extending his hand. "You're looking well." Chen shook his mentor's hand, noting the firmness of the grip. "It's good to see you, sir. How are you feeling?" "Better," Foster replied, glancing at his daughter with a smile. "The new medications are working. No more confusion, though I miss driving." He patted the passenger side of Emily's car. "But I've got a good chauffeur now." Emily smiled. "Dad wanted to come see you before your presentation at the academy this afternoon. He's been talking about it all week." The three of them made their way into the precinct, where officers stopped to greet Foster warmly. Many had visited him during his treatment, but seeing him back in the building brought a special energy to the morning. "Your case study has become quite the talking point at the academy," Foster said as they settled into the break room. "I hear they're using the dash cam footage to teach new recruits about difficult decisions." Jen poured coffee for them, a reverse of their old routine where Foster had always made the coffee during their mentoring sessions. "It wasn't easy, sir. That night, I kept thinking about everything you taught me." Foster's expression grew serious. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." He set his coffee cup down carefully. "You know, when they first told me about the dementia diagnosis, I was angry, embarrassed. Thought my legacy would be that night, getting arrested by my own protege." Emily touched her father's arm gently as he continued. "But then I realized something. My real legacy isn't just what I did on the force. It's what I taught others to do. And that night, you proved that the lessons stuck." Chen felt emotion welling up but maintained his composure. "I just did what you would have done." "Better," Foster corrected him. "I'm not sure I would have had the courage to arrest my own mentor. But you did exactly what needed to be done, and because of that," he gestured to himself, "I'm getting the help I need. My family knows what's happening. I'm not putting anyone at risk anymore." Other officers had gathered quietly near the break room, listening respectfully. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway, smiling at the scene. "The academy class starts in an hour," she reminded Chen gently. Foster stood up, straightening his jacket. "Mind if I tag along? Might be good for those recruits to hear both sides of the story." Chen looked surprised. "Are you sure, sir?" Absolutely, Foster replied firmly. They need to understand that doing the right thing isn't about rank or relationships. It's about protecting people, sometimes from themselves. As they walked toward the patrol car, Foster spoke quietly to Chen. You know, I've been thinking about that night a lot during treatment. I was scared, confused, angry. But even then, I knew you were doing the right thing. That's why I didn't fight it. Chen unlocked the car door. I've thought about it too. Every time I make a traffic stop, I remember. Good, Foster said, easing himself into the passenger seat. Use it. Learn from it. Teach others from it. That's how we grow. The drive to the academy was filled with comfortable conversation, reminiscent of their old patrol days but with a new depth of understanding between them. Foster shared stories about his treatment progress, and Chen updated him on department changes. As they pulled into the academy parking lot, Foster turned to Chen. One more thing, son. Thank you. Not just for that night, but for upholding everything I tried to teach you. You've made this old captain proud. Chen parked the car, taking a moment to compose himself. Ready to help me teach some recruits, sir? Foster smiled, the same smile that had encouraged countless officers over the years. Always ready to teach, James. Some things never change. Together, they walked into the academy building, mentor and protege, their relationship transformed but stronger through the test of integrity they had faced. Behind them, Emily watched with tears in her eyes, grateful that her father's legacy would continue through the lessons learned on that rainy night 3 months ago.